Thank you for your attendance. Thank you to the RGS Queensland for the invitation, and thank you, John, for your introduction. So I'll begin by paying my respects to the Torres Strait Islanders. They're saltwater people. Their lives and livelihood are all related to the sea. The bountiful turtles, dugong, fish, rock lobsters that they collect and trade with. And also they're proud of their distinct culture. It's a very distinct part of Australia. And they're rich in dance, music, and exuberant in spirit, as you probably know. So certainly pay my respects to them. Now, let's see. There we go. So this is from Conway's history of the ship. Not many people would think that the Torres Strait was a dangerous passage. But according to Conway's, the greatest challenge for sailors was the passage via the Torres Strait, even more so than the rounding of Cape Horn, either the tortuous inner route inside the Great Barrier Reef, or the outer route up through the reef-strewn Coral Sea, with the dangerous crossing of the barrier to follow. And of course, there were many ships that came unstuck trying to cross the Barrier Reef. But there is a list of shipwrecks. So from roughly 1800 to 1900, there was something like 200 recorded shipwrecks in the Torres Strait and the Barrier Reef, probably many more that were unrecorded, with 300 lives, plus or minus, lost. So that tells you how dangerous the passage it was. So there's the book. You've seen the front cover. There's the back cover as well, with a great chart, a maritime chart showing the island, around Thursday Island and the passages. And just reading, easier if I read it from here. You can hear me. The passage between the Australian mainland and Papua remains the most hazardous of all the major straits in the world. And the Torres Strait Islands have a strong seafaring tradition. Early navigators such as Torres, Cook, Bligh, Flinders and King contributed to the charting of this dangerous passage. However, it was only after the advent of steamships and the introduction of Torres Strait Pilots that it could be used as a major shipping route. Readers are advised this history will include stories of murder, mayhem, mutiny, disastrous shipwrecks, desperate voyages of survival, headhunting, and hurricanes. So I think that's a good start. So there's the chapters. The ones I've highlighted, I'm going to focus tonight on the early explorers. So, of course, Torres, Tasman, Cook, Bligh, Flinders, and King. So we'll learn a lot about them. But obviously, there's a lot more in this book. People had a little discussion earlier about Somerset and that history, Timor and Kupang. So, and the voyages of the convicts, escape from Port Jackson, the rescue of Barbara Thompson, the founding of Port Albany and Somerset, pearls and priests. So there's a lot more in here that I won't be able to talk about tonight. But we've got 230 pages plus 30 colour images. So there's a map of the Torres Strait. So you can see, I'll see if I get my pointer. Can you see that?
Yeah.
I can't. Oh, there it is. Okay. So we've obviously got the Barrier Reef, comes all the way up to the to where the Fly River comes in, and we'll see a better image of that. Obviously, the extension of Australia right up into Papua New Guinea, which was part of the Australian continent. So this is the Great Dividing Range extended north. And then the Arafura Sea at the other side. And then all the reef shoals, cays, rocks, whatever, that populate the Torres Strait. Now this begs the question, who are the Torres Strait Islanders? So originally The ones around Cape York and Marilug were Aboriginal in origin. The ones in the Northern Islands were Papuan, and the ones on the Eastern Islands were Melanesian, and they really occupied many of the Central Islands as well. So we've got three different distinct ethnic groups. And then, of course, when the pearling industry started, we've got the Pacific Islanders, the Samoans that came in. Then, of course, the Japanese, the Malays, the Chinese. So you mix that pot all together and you've got the Torres Strait Islanders, and quite a, as you would appreciate, a very unique group have been in Australia, a unique part of Australian culture. So here's a map of the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean, Australia. And the South Equatorial Current, which we'll talk a lot about. But you notice that the only direct passage between the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean is the Torres Strait. So we've got large volumes of water being transferred through that narrow passage all the time between these two major oceans. So that leads to a lot of the problems with currents, tides, etc. And also we'll see that the effect of this current pushing vessels onto the Great Barrier Reef down in here. So we'll refer back to the South Equatorial Current. So here's an example of the seafarers, the canoes that the Torres Strait Islanders built. This is a drawing by H.S. Melville on one of the Admiralty surveys. So you can see these huge logs that would come floating down the Fly River from inland Papua, and the Torres Strait Islanders, in particular the Melanesians, would. Yeah. You could see they added freeboard by stitching a planking up here. Of course, they added an outrigger, probably on both sides, and they formed a little deck here in the middle, which they're in the middle of building there. So that gives you an idea of their maritime skills, probably from their Melanesian origins, and these large vessels that, and we'll see more of them as we go through the talk. So who were the first Europeans to land in Australia? Of course, the Dutch. Willem Janszoon in March 1606 landed on what they thought was New Guinea, but of course we know it's now the Cape York Peninsula. So the first landing was here at the Pennefather River. They sailed south to Cape Turnabout, came back and sailed across the entrance to the Endeavour Strait and High Island, or Marilug there, up to these other islands and eventually to the muddy banks of Papua and back to Indonesia. So we have the first foreign vessels landing in Australia. So this is a map, 1592. Abraham Ortelius, a Dutch map maker, one of the very famous Dutch map makers. So we've got the Pacific Ocean, obviously North and South America. He's shown New Guinea as an island. And then we've got Terra Australis, a mythical Terra Australis all along the bottom. So Ortelius did state that it wasn't certain that New Guinea was an island, but of course we know that Torres proved that was correct, and we'll see that in the next map. So the original map from Torres apparently has vanished into the Spanish archives. This is a map from the French Bibliothèque Nationale. We know it relates to the Torres voyage for a couple of reasons. One is, well, we've got the Solomon Islands, which was the voyage by Mendana, the first voyage. The next voyage is Vanuatu, which was discovered here, or Espirito Santo. And of course, this is from where Torres left, sailing southwest to find Terra Australis, and eventually to sail north around to Manila. But he couldn't make the north. The winds were not conducive to making the north coast, and he was forced to sail along the south coast. So this map has the north coast with Spanish names, obviously, and then the south coast with Torres's names, and of course showing the shallow reefs and shoals of the Torres Strait right there. So Torres sailed with Diego de Prado, who wrote a report later, and he said, "We're amongst reefs and shoals for 34 days. There were many large islands, and they appeared more on the southern side." Of course, the largest island on the southern side was the continent of Australia, which obviously they didn't recognise, and of course that could have been the Terra Australis that they were sent to discover. But marvellous that we have this map from the French. Now, many of you would probably be familiar with Captain Brett Hilder, because he's written a thesis, MA thesis or MS thesis, and a book on Torres's voyage through the Torres Strait. So what he's showing here is Torres sailed, coasted along the south coast, along here, eventually sailed directly across the Gulf of Papua and encountered the reefs and shoals of the Torres Strait, and then found his way down eventually to the Endeavour Strait and sailed through and up to Indonesia, what is now Indonesia, what was then part of the Dutch East Indies. So so there we have the Brett Hilder's reconstruction of the voyage based on his experience as a Torres Strait pilot and many voyages through the Torres Strait. So next one is Tasman. So a couple of things here. Firstly, when Torres sailed through the Straits, he's heading for Manila, but he stopped on one of these islands off the coast of Halmahera. And at the time, both the Dutch and the Spanish occupied that island. Spanish on the east side, the Spanish on the west side, the Dutch on the east side. So somehow word got through to the Dutch that the Torres had sailed through the Torres Strait, but there was no documentation to prove that. But anyway, Tasman was, after his voyage along the south coast and discovery of Tasmania in New Zealand, he returned to Batavia and then was told to go and look for this, look for the Torres Strait and determine if it was navigable. Because if the Dutch could get through the Torres Strait, obviously that was a quicker route to the east coast of Australia than any other way of sailing around the south. So he was sent with 3 ships, shallow water ships, shallow draft ships, and the ship's boats, and they went out to try and explore the Torres Strait and find if it was navigable. Now, for most of the year, the winds blow from east to west, and it's not navigable on a voyage from west to east. But during the northwest monsoon, so that's from December, January, February, March, it is theoretically possible to sail west through the Torres Strait. Tasman arrived in April, so he quickly realised, well, it would be impossible to sail through. And as far as I know, and it's written up in the book, there's only one voyage that I know of, where a sailing voyage from west to east on the Zenobia, if anyone knows the history of the Zenobia. Anyway, Tasman, got close. I mean, this is the Endeavour Strait here, with High Island or Princess Whale Island or Marilyn, but obviously determined that it was not navigable because of the prevailing winds from the east. So that was 1645. We then have a gap of a couple of hundred years before Captain Cook turns up on the 1770 on the east coast of Australia. So I'm sure you all know the Cook story. I don't have to elaborate on that, but there's the Endeavour at Endeavour River after they crashed into some coral, unloaded the boat, and then they're repairing the vessel. So they were lucky they even survived that for a couple of reasons. One was there was a hole smashed into the vessel, but there was a lump of coral stuck in the hole. So if the lump of coral was not stuck in the hole, they wouldn't have, the pumps were barely able to clear the water anyway, so they wouldn't have survived. And of course, the other good thing is they weren't that far from the Endeavour River. So, so they fixed that and then sailed off. And this time they were determined to get outside the Barrier Reef. So here we've got Cook's track from Endeavour River to Cape York. So here's Endeavour River. They sailed up inside the reef as far as Lizard Island. And Cook scaled to the top of Lizard Island, like I've done. I think, Ray, you've probably done it as well. And you look out to the Barrier Reef and you can see the gap that they then sailed through to get outside the reef. So they're very happy here, 2 days, quick sailing outside the reef. But what's happening here? It's that southern equatorial current. It's pushing them back towards the Barrier Reef again. So they almost didn't escape again until they were able to find what Cook called the Providential Channel. Thanks to the actions of God, they were able to get back inside the Barrier Reef. And you can see their voyage now up and around into Endeavour Strait and out through and then on to Indonesia. So they were lucky twice. You know, if they hadn't had those two lucky chances, we'd still be wondering, where is Cook? Where is the Endeavour?
Or Australia.
Or Australia. So yes, and it would have been, if it smashed on the Barrier Reef, you would never found it because it just had been destroyed with all the wave activity. But luckily, they got back to England, which is a great part of the story. So we have Cook's original sketch map, starting over here. So there's the. Sorry, zoomers. I moved out of the screen. There's the Providential Channel, and the map up to inside the Barrier Reef until they get up to what he called York Cape, not Cape York, York Island, which is probably Adolphus Island, and then around through the Endeavour Strait and off to Booby Island and then off. So we've got York Cape and Prince of Wales Island, and of course Possession Island, which is highly significant because that's where he did or didn't claim Australia for Britain, if you know that story. So, but yeah, his original map and the discovery of the Endeavour Strait, and of course he found the easiest and quickest way through the Torres Strait by pure chance. So we'll move on to the next one, which is William Bligh. But first, Daniel Solander was the botanist with Banks on the Endeavour. And of course, when they're in Tahiti, they ate breadfruit almost every day because it was far more palatable and nutritious than the mouldy bread or stale whatever they're eating. So Solander says that breadfruit was eaten daily by the crew as a substitute for bread, universally esteemed as palatable and nourishing as bread itself. He says, I don't scruple to call it one of the most useful vegetables in the world, and it undoubtedly must be of the utmost consequence to bring so valuable a fruit to countries where the climate is favourable. Well, what happened was the sugar planters in the West Indies needed to feed the slaves, and the slaves had grown partial to North Atlantic cod, which is quite expensive, and they thought, well, breadfruit will be a better alternative. Of course, the result was that the slaves wouldn't eat breadfruit. So, but there's a whole story that goes with that, which you're familiar with. So there's the mutiny on the Bounty. William Bligh and his 18 loyal followers, not necessarily to him, but certainly to the Royal Navy, because they knew that, mutiny was punishable by death. So they're leaving the Bounty. Sorry, you can see the trees there on the back, and off they take their voyage. So I'm sure you know that story: 6,000 kilometres in 6 weeks. Most people die after 2 weeks, but they had some food with them from the Bounty, and they're able to capture some seabirds, fish, other things to sustain their diet. So they did survive the voyage all the way to Timor. So here we've got the map. This is Bligh's map of the Barrier Reef and the Torres Strait. So he would have been looking for Cook's Providential Channel. He sailed south of that and found what is now known as Bligh's Boat Channel, and then got to the island, Restoration Island, where they're able to stretch out and sleep for the first time in 5 weeks, I guess, or 4 weeks, because none of them could. There were 18 people crammed on that boat. No one could stretch out and sleep. And they ate the last of their pork and some shellfish, oysters, and things, and some leaves, and had a stew. So Bligh thinks that's what rejuvenated them and allowed them to get the rest of the way to Timor. So here's the detail of that map. So we've got he named Turtle Island, a high island with a flat top, which is the Mount Adolphus. So they sail between the Adolphus Channel here. This is the Endeavour Strait. So Bligh called it the Bay of Islands. I think he recognised that it could have been the Endeavour Strait, but named it differently. He then sailed around the north coast of Marilug, or Prince of Wales, named Wednesday Island. So we've got the first of the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I don't know if there's a Saturday or a Sunday. There should be. If there isn't one, there should be. And of course, out to Booby Island, and then on to Timor. And then he turned that. He was taking lats and longs where he could. He had a watch as well, and then he produced a much more detailed map, which we'll talk about later. And there's Kupang in West Timor, and an image of the Bligh party arriving. So they all survived, except one by one over the following days, weeks, and months. A number of them passed away due to the state of their health after that 6-week voyage. So, but Bligh made it back. He was the first to get back, and of course to tell his story of the mutiny, and demand that he didn't have to demand, the Admiralty would send the ships to capture the mutineers. So this is HMS Pandora, 1791, sent to capture the Bounty mutineers. A frigate of 24 guns with 130 men on board. under the command of Captain Edward Edwards, with orders to proceed to Tahiti and capture what they could of the Bounty mutineers. So that 130 men is obviously far more than was necessary, but they're hoping to capture the Bounty, and they had extra master mates and midshipmen on board to sail that back to England. Of course, by this time, the Bounty had been scuttled and burnt at Pitcairn Island, so that wasn't going to happen. But they did get to Tahiti. They did arrest 14 of the mutineers that had stayed on Tahiti and hadn't gone with Christian and 8 or 9 other mutineers to Pitcairn Island. So the Pandora returned to England, or Torres Strait, with 14 of the mutineers, and then was wrecked trying to cross the Great Barrier Reef in 1791. So there's an image of the Pandora. You can see the men escaping, some of them, down a rope at the back, others clustered at the stern, waiting to go down, and there's 3 or 4 of the ship's boats at the rear there. So the 14 prisoners, mutineers, were in a box on the deck named Pandora's box. So 10 were able to, the crew, they had iron manacles on their ankles, thank you. And the box was obviously locked. But one of the crew unlocked the box, threw the key to the manacles down into the box, and 10 were able to escape, but unfortunately 4 were drowned before they could. And 89 of the Pandora's crew survived, and 31 there drowned. So now we have another voyage in the ship's boats to try and reach Timor. And there's an image of the voyage from the Pandora wreck site to the East Islands, inside the Barrier Reef, around to Mount Adolphus or Adolphus Island, north of Wednesday Island, and then out to Timor. Now, interestingly, there's a midshipman named, I'll have to remember his name, I think Hayward, Joseph Hayward, but he was one of the original crew that sailed with Bligh and through the Torres Strait on the open boats, and then returned to England. So he was sent back with on the Pandora to identify the mutineers when they found them. So lucky guy, he gets to travel twice through the Torres Strait in the ship's boats for survival. I don't think he would want to go back a third time. So now we have Captain Bligh's second chance. I'm not sure whether this was a reward or a punishment, but King George said that Bligh should go back to Tahiti and collect the breadfruit plants that he'd be assigned to collect. So there's the Providence and the Assistant on their arrival in Tahiti, with obviously Tahitian boats surrounding them and welcoming them. They got a big welcome there. So the idea was to keep as with the first voyage, keep the breadfruit plants on board in tropical climate as long as possible. So they were to come back through the Torres Strait, and Bligh was asked to find another route through. So this is an image of he discovered the Bligh entrance, which is still named the Bligh entrance, at the very northern extent of the Barrier Reef, and you can see where all the sediment coming in from the Fly River kills off the coral. So there's a reason why the Barrier Reef stops there. But he found the Bligh entrance and then sailed down this northeast channel as far as what's Tudu Island, which is right there. So we got an image from George Tobin. So Matthew Flinders and George Tobin were second or third lieutenants on the vessel. So this is interesting because Cook trained Bligh with his navigational skills, and Bligh then trained Flinders. So Flinders is learning his navigational skills from Bligh as they sail through the Torres Strait. We've got an image here on the bottom by George Tobin of one of the large Torres Strait vessels, and of course more sailing around. So we've got a launch in front and the assistant, and then the Providence in the rear, another launch there. So they're sailing down the northwest channel there. And when they reach Tudu Island, they are attacked by the islanders in these canoes. So you can see a large number of canoes there, large ones, small ones, middle-sized ones, etc. The assistant was a smaller ship, so they chose that. So you can read here a description by Flinders. 3 men were wounded on the assistant, and one of them afterwards died. The depth to which the arrows penetrate the decks and sides of the brig was found to be truly astonishing. In fact, on the vessel, they couldn't even pull the arrows out. They'd come in with such force. So that was interesting. So let's see, next we've got Flinders. So Flinders, this is before his second voyage to Australia. So as you probably know, and it doesn't show on this map, but on his second voyage, Flinders mapped the south coast of Australia, which was, this is the Cook, post-Cook, so we've got New Holland and New South Wales. So the south coast, this part wasn't mapped, nor was Bass Strait. And there was a gap here where Cook was outside the Barrier Reef. And of course, the rest of this map is based on the Dutch mapping. So Flinders was planning to, and was sent by the Admiralty to continue mapping more of Australia in the Investigator. And so he sailed up to the Torres Strait and looking for an easy entrance in. So we've got the Cook entrance from the interior. We've got Bligh's entrance from the outside the reef. Flinders, this is a painting by George Tobin again, but this is Mare or Murray Island, which is volcanic. So you can see it stands well up above the horizon. So on any sort of day, if you're outside the Barrier Reef here, you can see Murray Island or Mare. So Flinders sailed north and then found a passage which he called the Flinders Entrance, or was called the Flinders Entrance, down to Murray Island and then out through the rest of the Torres Strait. So he did that in 6 days, which wasn't too bad. So we've got another route through the Torres Strait. Now, I think you probably know quite a lot about the Flinders story. So this is that was Flinders' second voyage through the Torres Strait. His third voyage, he never got there. He was sailing on, I think, on the Porpoise, but it was wrecked in a reef in the Coral Sea. And this is Flinders sailing off in the ship's boat to back to Port Jackson to hopefully rescue I don't know how many there were, but maybe 70 or 80 men from the 2 ships stuck there on that reef. I think it's called Wreck Reef.
Is that flag a distress signal?
It is. Very clearly, upside down flag is always a distress signal. Now, you would know, of course, that Flinders was detained on Mauritius for 7 years. because the French were now at war with England, or England was now at war with France. And he was unable to return to England until 1810, when the English actually were about to capture Mauritius. But you can see here, Flinders is already ill. If you make a comparison from that first portrait we saw and the second one, he looks very, very gaunt. It was painted on Mauritius before he left. So, of course, Flinders then, when he did get back to London, in the intervening 4 years, prepared his map of what Banks and the Admiralty wanted to call Terra Australis, but what Flinders named Australia. So we thank him for putting Australia on the map. Otherwise, we might still be called, or we would still be called, Terra Australis. So you can see his mapping of all of the south coast, including Encounter Bay, which you might be familiar with, and then the Bass Strait, his earlier circumnavigation of Van Diemen's Land, his mapping of the east coast, following Cook, and then outside the Barrier Reef and up to the Flinders Passage, and then mapping parts of the Gulf of Carpentaria before the Investigator started taking on so much water it was no longer safe. So his map, all of the west coast is from the Dutch mapping of New Holland, but we have his mapping of most of the east coast of Australia. So a very, very important map in Australian history. Now we get to King. We discussed King earlier, that he doesn't get the credit. He mightn't get the credit he deserves. So here he is in the Cutter Mermaid. He was sent by the Admiralty, so he was the first of the naval hydrographers to come to Australia. And there's the Mermaid at Endeavour River, where the Endeavour itself had anchored. And a portrait of Philip Parker King. So King fills in the gaps, this gap here where both Cook and Flinders were outside the Barrier Reef. And then, of course, all of the west, or most of the west coast that Flinders hadn't mapped. He'd only used the Dutch map. And this is the 1829, the General Chart of Australia by Flinders and King. So King gets his name on the map, Flinders and then King. And it's an official map of the Royal Navy, by the Royal Navy Hydrographic Group. Of course, King didn't quite make it back. So there's a painting with Conrad Martins of the Mermaid about to come unstuck off Cape Banks, Botany Bay. And that's vividly described in the book of how they only just survived to get back to Port Jackson. So from then on, 1837 to 1850, we have the work of the Royal Navy hydrographers, King, Wickham, Blackwood, Ewell and Stanley, who from 1837 to 1850 constructed these detailed hydrographic charts. So this is one of Cape York, Albany Island, Elphus Island, Prince of Wales Island, Horn, Thursday Island, etc., etc., etc. So you can see the amount of detail. So each one of those points had to be located, and of course they would have used the old-fashioned method of throwing a red line over and recording the water depth. So guess how many points are on that map? That's a little trivia competition we can do later.
Do you have the answer?
No, I definitely don't have the answer. But yeah, many points. So this is a dramatic image of the French vessels of the French expedition, the Astrolabe and the Zelle, on the reef at Tudu Island, which Bligh named Warrior Island because of the attack that you saw earlier. And there's a quote from Joseph Jukes of the Fly, which is quite ironic, because he says, however complete and accurate may be the surveys of the Torres Strait and the Coral Sea, it must always remain a dangerous navigation. Just ask the French and Dumont d'Urville. They were lucky to get off. I think it took, they went through like 3 or 4 high tides and weren't able to get off. And finally there was I'm not sure whether a westerly wind or an easterly wind that forced the water up, and they were able to float off. So they were extremely lucky. So there's an image of the HMS Rattlesnake, captained by Owen Stanley, who you would know from Owen Stanley Rangers, with an example of at least 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 of the vessels from the Torres Strait Islanders. So here we've got a simple dugout canoe with a lovely hand-carved prow, which is probably a dugong, representing a dugong. And then we've got one of these larger canoes with probably 2 outriggers. And then we've got probably a double outrigger with a platform, men standing on it there. And then more of those in the background. Of course, these ones have large sails as well. So a good example of what not only what the Rattlesnake looked like, but what the other vessels look like in the Torres Strait. All right, so we're getting near to the end. I think I'm right on time. So a chart of the Torres Strait. So it wasn't until the advent of steamships, because obviously sailing wind-powered sail is very difficult. The Torres Strait Pilots and the navigation beacons that finally allowed the Torres Strait to become a major shipping channel. So you can see there the beacons all along the Northwest Passage, the exits there through the Bligh entrance or close to the Flinders entrance, and of course the entrance through into the north of Thursday Island. So there's a lot. I don't know if that's Wreck Reef there, where the porpoise and cater ran aground. That's worth checking out. So I'm close to the end, or I am at the end. So certainly appreciate your attention, and happy to answer any questions.
To introduce myself, I'm Graham Darlene Vision Darlene at York. My great-grandfather Frank found a treasure wreck in 1890. We're talking about a number of shipwrecks.
Right.
And they brought up 1,578 pounds weight of bullion off that,
Wow.
plus old cannon. Sad part is, a lot of it was sold at Sotheby's in England and converted into dinner service, chocolate bits at home. However, they lodged the residue into the Queensland National Bank, which went bust in 1893, and the whole lot was lost. Anyway, that's a little bit of story there.
So bullion, that was more likely to be a Spanish ship or a Dutch ship.
Because the Spanish ship
Spanish ship.
returning to the goldfield in Australia, because most of the coins on it were dated about 1830.
Right.
About that figure. But pretty modern, really, and this was 1890. Yeah. So they say that it sank, and that was that.
Yeah. Well, I hope the Jardines pocketed some of that.
Well, a few bits I got at home.
So I do write quite a bit about the Jardines in the book, but not in the presentation tonight.
Wow.
Yeah.
One aspect there that you drew attention to was the use by the Torres Strait Islanders of very powerful bows that
Mm-hmm.
the report had stuck in the
Yeah.
side of the ships. the New Guineans have bows that are 6 foot long, and where you hold the bow, it can be like 3 inches thick, and so it's about a 6 foot length of bow. The arrows can be 4 to 5 foot long, very, very strong arrows. And the power that those bows could develop must have been immense, because the British Admiralty or whatever they had their famous longbows. But and some of the photos there earlier on showed their bows. But interestingly, our Aborigines don't seem to have picked up the bow somehow.
No, it didn't cross the Torres Strait.
Well, but you'd wonder with all these vessels, the Torres Strait vessels, that it should, but maybe it reflects that the Aborigines came through much, much earlier.
Certainly, yeah. I should explain the question to the Zoom people on Zoom? Would they have heard it, or
The timber,
they heard it? Okay.
the material they made them out. The timbers of New Guinea are stronger.
No, but just basic thing like we don't seem to have bows in Australia amongst the Aborigines. So it was just an interesting
it's very a marked difference. And I think it's Flinders or Tobin writes about they actually traded for some of these bows, and they couldn't draw them. They didn't have the strength, and certainly not to have them arrows embedded in the hull.
Yeah, I'm impressed that you recognise Pennyfather River.
Yes.
Because a lot of people don't.
Okay.
And I think it's sad they don't recognise it as the original strike of Europeans.
Right.
So to speak.
I didn't comment on it, but that map has, in Dutch, it's Rivière met Bush, river with bush. So bush is actually a Dutch term, I think from South Africa. But, and then they sail south to what they call Village Bay, which is Fly Bay.
Oh, yeah.
So I tell people you've got bush and you've got flies. Where are we?
We don't wish to drop that. Question from online, Ian. Thanks for your interesting stories. This is from David Kerr. Is there a record of local people assisting in the navigation of the Torres by the Europeans?
Good question. Yeah. Not that I know of. But when you got to the Admiralty hydrographers, it's quite possible, but I haven't read of that. I don't know of that. They certainly didn't assist them by headhunting and shooting arrows and bows and things and spears, but no, that's an interesting question, but I don't know.
Got a query. The Torres Pilots, when were they introduced, and do they still have them or not, or is it just all modern stuff that gets them through?
Good question. 1850s, I think the pilots began. I've got a definite date in the book. And that they were already experienced sailing through the Torres Strait. So it's a great job if you want to retire as a captain to get a job as a pilot, because you had more time ashore. But now any commercial vessels cannot sail through the Torres Strait without a pilot on board, because you've got the big bulk ore carriers from Gove, from Weipa. You've got huge oil tankers bringing refined fuel from Singapore or wherever. So they and any other commercial vessel have to have a Torres Strait pilot on board. And what's amazing to me is the minimum clearance, I guess they have, is below the hull is 1 metre water, which is about that high. And so these big bulk carriers have to time their passage according to the tides. So I gave a talk at the Maritime Museum in Sydney, and one of the captains was there, and he said, well, when they're loading manganese or bauxite or manganese in Gove, they've got to look from when they're departing to when the next highest tide is, that they can get through with the maximum capacity. But at some point, they've got to stop loading if they're going to exceed that capacity. So it's interesting. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Shackleton has recognised as, having done one of the most extraordinary and miraculous recovery journeys from Antarctica. But I think, as you've described with Bligh, perhaps we sort of overlooked him a bit, and because of his bad reputation. But perhaps we should reread up on Bligh, because that was a pretty miraculous.
Oh, it was. Yeah. And we've got another one, which is the escape from Sydney Cove. Some of you familiar with that story? So you've got, I think it's 8 or 9 or more convicts who commandeer the governor's launch and escape from Sydney Cove with food and supplies and everything they need. And they make their way all up the east coast, surviving on whatever food they can gather, encountering the Aborigines along the way. And they reach Timor as well. And they land there with the story that they were on a British ship that was wrecked on the Barrier Reef. So we've got another, people say that's equivalent to the Bligh voyage as well, because they weren't experienced, or some of them were, but they weren't experienced seamen like the Bligh. Yeah.
After standing on the tip of Cape York, you can actually physically see the current going through.
Right.
And a lot of the time the current is higher than the land you're standing on, this type of thing. That's because of the rise and fall of the tide.
Yes. Well, as I said, you've got half of the Pacific Ocean trying to get into the Indian Ocean. And someone's seen it, I haven't seen it, but somewhere west of Torres Strait Islanders is actually a tidal waterfall. So there's a rock there, and the tide's so strong the water comes up and over the rock, which apparently is quite a thing to see.
I lived in Gove for a fair while, but
Right.
I was north of there in a boat, only like a 15-footer, and a bloke sitting on the back end, and I was driving, and all of a sudden we dropped about 12 feet, bang, straight down a ball of water. And he went overboard and managed to ride it all right and get him back on board again. But yeah, it was just a wall of water. We suddenly just went straight over it.
And you're going west to east or east to west?
We'd gone north from Gove, up
North,
Wessels
okay.
towards the Wessels.
Yeah.
Unreal. Came up so quick that we.
All right. Okay, I'll use that story if I may.
Any other questions from our audience?
What year was the Soviet?
It's in the book, 1850s, I think. The only voyage I know of a sailing vessel going west to east. And they encountered all sorts of problems. They had lost all their anchors trying to anchor, because you've got to anchor overnight. They lost all their anchors. Luckily, they had cannon on board, so they used their cannon as anchors. And I guess they lost all their cannon too. Sorry, there was another.
What sort of traffic goes through Torres Strait now? Is it still a mainstream
Very much so.
navigation channel?
Just imagine all goods, apart from the bulk carriers I told you, all goods coming from China, there's a lot of it, to the east coast on these container ships. It either has to go through the Torres Strait or around the north coast of New Guinea. I'm not sure how that's split out. And I tell people, if you're thinking of buying a new car, buy an EV, because there'll be a Chinese submarine right off the Arafura Sea, knocking off any of those big vessels coming through the Torres Strait. Yes, because we've only got 60 days worth of fuel.
Yep.
So it's critical for Australian strategic interests.
True.
Yeah.
We have no further questions, I have. Ralph?
So given the width of from north to south of the strait, what's the main shipping channel that is used in the modern
Yep.
shipping?
Well, we go back to that chart. So there's an entrance here. I should remember the name of it, but it's right north of Thursday Island, because you can see it from Thursday Island. Well, maybe it's here, and then up all the way up through the Great Eastern Channel, and then either out through the Bligh entrance or the Flinders entrance. There will be some vessels coming this way inside the Barrier Reef, but I think they'd be smaller vessels. Most of the commercial vessels would go up the northeast channel, and that shows all the lights that were there. Of course, now with satellite navigation, they're almost redundant. Yeah.
So you don't think that the Chinese vessels that went through there recently were novices at that route?
Well, the question is, do they have a Torres Strait pilot?
Yeah.
And I think not. I searched that, so there was 3 vessels. 2 of them went around the north coast. 1 came through the Torres Strait. I don't think they would have stopped to pick up a pilot.
Interesting.
Be a bit awkward if they took the wrong route.
It would be.
But it is Australian waters, isn't it?
Oh, yes, yeah.
I asked about the Genovia because for the year, if they were the first one to come back that way. But when Stanley finished in 1849, the Bramble came home down that way. They come west to east and then down the east coast, while Stanley went home by Perth, by the west.
No, Stanley came back with the Rattlesnake to Sydney.
The Rattlesnake. Yeah, but he went by the west coast.
That I don't know.
Yeah.
All
The Bramble, he sent the Bramble down the east coast,
right.
and he went home by around that way
Do we know why?
to Sydney. He wanted to check which was the fastest route,
Oh, okay.
sort of thing. And it was only a couple of days difference, believe it or not.
All right.
The
Interesting.
Bramble took
Yeah.
to come down the east coast. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot in the book about, those who want to sail the east, inside passage and the outside passage,
Yeah.
which was quicker, which was safer.
Yeah.
Well, that argument went on for quite a long time.
With that, everyone, please have a fantastic night. For those online, thank you so much. And for those here in person, some brief nibbles for you at the back, as well as
Thank
books for such.
you.